The air stank of blood and oil. Not Earth's oil. No, the synthetic fuel that powered the Exilor machines, thick and bitter with a tang that stuck to the back of your throat. Sergeant Blake Riker crouched behind a collapsed corridor wall, cradling a smoking rifle that was 2 shots from overheating. The station had gone silent 3 minutes ago, which meant the last of his squad was either dead or dying. And now it was just him, breathing heavy, ears ringing, watching for the shimmer that marked an Exilor cloaking unit. They'd come out of nowhere. No declaration, no warning. Just orbital fire that ripped holes into cities and vaporized governments. Earth had scrambled to respond. But what could a fractured species do against an empire that spanned galaxies? The answer, it turned out, was simple. Bleed. Bleed and scream and bite back. Blake hadn't planned to be a symbol. He wasn't a commander, wasn't a tactician. He fixed comm units and shot straight. But when the Exilor slaughtered his brothers in arms like they were vermin, when they laughed in that clicking dialect and tore his friend Mason's jaw clean off, it flipped something in him. Something primal. Something that didn't give a damn about odds or alien superiority. He'd stolen their tech. He learned how their cloaking worked, how their shields cycled every 12 seconds, even how their elite warriors felt pain, intense, paralyzing pain when their spine joints were targeted. And one by one he picked them off. Not cleanly, not honorably, but efficiently. Tonight, though, something had changed. Command had gone dark, and this Exilor vessel, deep in Earth's orbit, wasn't part of a standard assault unit. No, this was something else. Bigger, more dangerous. The walls hummed with life. The tech was newer, sleeker, and whatever they were hiding in the central chamber, it wasn't meant for humans to see. But Blake had seen it, or rather, heard it. As he crawled past a vent shaft 2 hours ago, he caught pieces of their language, filtered and translated through the cracked Exilor comm implant he'd embedded behind his ear. A weapon. No, not a weapon. Something worse. A reset device. A planetary purifier. They were going to erase Earth. Start over. Blake gritted his teeth. His body ached. His ribs were bruised, maybe fractured. His arm was burned where an Exilor plasma whip had nearly split his bicep in 2. But none of it mattered now. If he could get to that chamber, plant the last charge he had left, it wouldn't stop the Empire, but it would send a message, one they'd never forget. He moved silently, sliding under piping and dodging motion scanners. His breath was steady, his pulse controlled. He didn't have anything left to lose, not since Chicago fell, not since his sister's voice cut off mid-transmission. He pressed his back to a vent hatch, listening. The room beyond crackled with static. Alien voices clicked and buzzed. And then, silence. He kicked the panel open and rolled inside, rifle aimed, finger on the trigger. 5 Exilor stared at him. They didn't raise weapons. They didn't scream. They just laughed. And one of them, taller, heavier armored, eyes like polished obsidian, stepped forward. "You speak our tongue," it said, voice distorted but clear through the implant. Blake didn't blink. "I do. You are alone, dying. I've been dying since your ships showed up. You came to destroy our purifier. You were too late." Blake smiled, slow and dangerous. "Number I came to give you an answer." He pulled a trigger, not on his rifle, but the detonator in his palm. The room exploded, not with fire, not with smoke, but with EMP, pure, ripping static that shut down every system, including the one powering the purifier. As alarms blared and Exilor scrambled, Blake limped to the core. He placed the real charge, old Earth tech, unstable but lethal. He stared into the mainframe's cold blue light and muttered, "You want war? You got it." And he pressed the final button. The blast didn't kill him. That was the first mistake they made, assuming a human wouldn't go down swinging with a backup plan stitched into his blood and bone. Blake Riker hit the ground hard when the charge went off, the pressure knocking the air from his lungs like a steel punch to the chest. For a moment, everything blurred. Light, pain, gravity twisting sideways. And then it snapped back. Fire burned in his throat. His skin stung with static, every hair on his body standing like live wires, but he was alive. More importantly, they weren't. The purifier's core had gone dark. No hum, no resonance, just silence. And silence meant failure on their part. He forced himself up, coughing through the smoke. 3 Exilor lay slumped nearby, twitching. The EMP had fried their internal symbiotics. Whatever nanotech they relied on to regulate pain, to heal, to fight, it was dead. Blake walked up to one of them, its armor cracked from the blast, and stared into its glossy black eyes. "Still breathing?" he muttered. The Exilor gurgled something in its native tongue, probably a curse. Blake didn't care. He raised his boot and crushed its throat. Efficient, brutal, no hesitation. He didn't have the luxury of mercy anymore, not after what they'd done, not after Mason, not after Lisa, not after Earth. The walls of the chamber flickered as emergency lights kicked in. Red, stuttering beams that made everything look soaked in blood. He knew it was only a matter of time before reinforcements arrived. This wasn't a raiding party. This ship was a node in their Empire's spinal cord. If Blake had managed to shut down even a part of that system, they'd respond. Fast, with force, and he wasn't ready to die. Not yet. He pulled a blade from one of the fallen Exilor, curved, made of some obsidian-like metal that vibrated faintly when touched. Their weapons were personal, crafted to their biology. Holding one felt wrong, like gripping a serpent's fang. But he needed something quiet now, something that didn't overheat or scream in plasma bursts. He moved fast, navigating through the smoking corridors, his boots crunching broken panels and charred bone. The ship was bigger than any Earthborn design. Vaulted ceilings, endless halls, strange architecture that ignored symmetry. Alien minds didn't think like humans. They built in loops and organic shapes. Blake had memorized some of it from stolen schematics, but most of this he was winging, and winging had kept him alive so far. He tapped his comm unit, praying it still functioned. Static, a hiss, then a faint voice. "Riker, do you copy? Static. Pullout failed." His heart jumped. That voice. Captain Darrow, that old bastard had survived. Blake adjusted the frequency. "This is Riker. I've disabled the purifier. I repeat, the weapon is offline." "Status?" "Static, then. Barely got out of the LZ, 2 dropships destroyed. We're scattering. You're alone in there, son." Blake clenched his jaw. "I know. You have an exfil plan?" "Number, but I've got something better." Silence on the other end. Then, "What?" "They think I'm dead." That's when the alarms changed pitch. Shrill, wailing, a call to arms. Blake smiled grimly. "Guess they just found the core." He broke into a run. He couldn't just leave. Destroying 1 purifier wasn't enough. They had thousands. This was a message, but it had to be loud. Deafening. He needed data, coordinates, blueprints, something that Earth could use to fight back. If this ship had 1 purifier, it probably had schematics to all the others. This was the chance of a lifetime. If he could survive it. He ducked into an auxiliary data chamber. Smaller than the core. Quieter. He'd hacked Exilor interfaces before. They used neural syncing, which meant pain was the key. You had to let their tech bite you. Literally. He jammed the stolen blade into a socket. The panel hissed open. Tendrils lashed out, needle-thin wires grabbing his wrist, burrowing into his skin. Blake didn't flinch. Pain surged. His brain screamed. his vision whitewashed. But then the flood began. Data, raw and alien, pouring into his mind. Locations, ship specs, weaknesses. The Exilor weren't invincible. They had cracks, faults. And Earth could exploit them. He yanked back, blood running down his arm. The panel went dark. Data secured. Footsteps echoed. Heavy, measured. Not like the soldiers. These were elite. He knew that sound. He moved into position, blade tight in hand. The door hissed open. 2 Exilor entered. Sleeker armor, taller frames. Their movements were fluid, almost elegant. They scanned the room. Blake was already behind them. The first one died with a slit throat, its blood spraying hot and black. The second turned, roaring, and Blake lunged, ramming the blade through its eye. It fell with a thud. He didn't pause. Every second was a gift. Blake ran. He was heading for the fighter bay. Not to escape. Yet. First, he needed to upload the data. Earth had relay beacons scattered in the upper stratosphere, cloaked but interceptable. If he could get to one of the Exilor's long-range comm units, patch into it, bounce the signal to the nearest Earth beacon, it'd be enough. He reached the bay. Empty. Too quiet. A trap? Didn't matter. He found the terminal, wired in the data node. Started the upload. 15%. He counted every breath, every blink. 32%. A whir behind him. He turned. Too late. An armored fist slammed into his chest, lifting him off the ground and slamming him into a console. Pain exploded through his ribs. He gasped, vision swimming. The Exilor commander stood over him, massive, plated in dark crimson armor. "You are persistent," it said. Blake spat blood. "You started this war. I'm just replying. You are alone. One human. Funny. You keep saying that like it matters." The Exilor tilted its head. "You cannot stop the Empire." Blake grinned, teeth stained red. "I don't need to stop it. I just need to slow it down, so the rest of us can catch up." 75%. The commander lunged. Blake rolled, grabbing the fallen blade. The fight was fast, brutal. Metal clanged, flesh tore. Blake was faster, but weaker, hurt. Every strike cost him more than he could afford. 90%, the commander roared, smashing the console. Too late. Upload complete. Blake pressed the emergency eject button. The node shot into orbit, seeking the Earth beacon. He turned to face the commander, coughing. Blood leaked from his mouth, his side. "You've already lost," Blake said. The Exilor raised a blade, and Blake laughed. Cold. Defiant. "You want war?" he whispered. And then he pulled the last pin on the last charge tucked into his belt. The bay erupted in fire. Pain. It came first. Sharp, immediate, real. Then heat. Searing everywhere like he was lying in the sun's mouth. Blake Riker woke to a metallic groan above his head and the thick, choking scent of scorched polymer. Every muscle screamed. His ears were ringing so loud they muffled his thoughts. But he was breathing. He was still breathing. He opened his eyes slowly. One of them wouldn't fully cooperate, swollen shut. The other blinked into a haze of black smoke and shifting light. He lay beneath a twisted slab of debris, part of the bay ceiling that had collapsed during the blast. Somehow, it had fallen at just the right angle to shield him from the worst of the explosion. Or maybe the universe wasn't done using him yet. Either way, he was still alive. Blake rolled to his side, gritting his teeth so hard his jaw felt like it might snap. Everything hurt. His side was wet. He didn't have to look to know it was blood. His left arm throbbed with a dull, deep ache. Broken? Maybe. Didn't matter. He had one working arm, one working eye, and his legs still moved. That was all he needed. He crawled out from under the wreckage. The fighter bay was unrecognizable. Fire danced along the walls. Shattered glass and alien steel littered the floor like the remains of some mechanical beast. Smoke rose from the far end, where the fighter launch tubes had been. Nothing was launching from here now. And the Exilor commander? Gone. Blown to hell, or at least crippled enough to not matter anymore. Blake hoped it had been close enough to feel the heat of that charge as it went off. He hoped it had seen Blake's face in those final seconds, but he didn't waste time wondering. He limped to the bay's access terminal, only half expecting it to respond. The screen flickered, glitching through Exilor symbols, then stabilized. He tapped into the internal schematics. A miracle. The data upload had finished. The node was gone. Out in orbit. If Earth's relay caught it, then everything he fought for, bled for, was worth it. But now came the hard part. Getting out. This ship was going down. He could feel it. The tremors. The structural groans. The secondary explosions firing off in the distance. He'd done more damage than he thought, and that made him smile through the blood and ash. He needed a way out. Most of the escape pods were torched. The fighter tubes were slag. But the Exilor had auxiliary drop shuttles, smaller, used for surface incursions and boarding operations. One of those, if still operational, could punch through the debris field and slip him out into orbit. From there, maybe, just maybe, he could drift toward an Earthcraft, or a beacon, or even just die in space instead of a burning alien tomb. He pulled himself towards the shuttle bay. Each hallway was a new hell. Fires burned unchecked. Walls bent inwards like the ship was folding under its own guilt. He passed Exilor bodies, some charred, others sliced, a few still twitching. None tried to stop him. None even looked alive. When he reached the shuttle bay, he paused, staring at the last working dropship. It was sleek, small, still humming with power. Luck again? Maybe. Or maybe this was fate pushing him just far enough to suffer a little more. He limped inside. The controls weren't intuitive. Exilor tech was always too smooth, too abstract. But he'd cracked their interface before, and this time was no different. He synced the neural chip, gritting through the sting as the needles sank into his temple. The display blinked to life. Auto-launch sequence initiated. He collapsed into the pilot seat, watching as the shuttle's systems spooled up. The docking clamps released, thrusters engaged, and with a lurch that knocked the breath from his chest, the dropship shot out into open space. Silence. Real silence. Stars glittered ahead, distant and indifferent. Behind him, the Exilor ship burned, a silent inferno slowly tearing itself apart. Pieces broke away, drifting into the void. Blake watched as one of the engines flared and died, taking a chunk of the ship with it. He leaned back, bones aching, heart pounding. "I told you," he whispered hoarsely to the stars. "You wanted war." But peace wasn't coming yet. An alarm blared. The shuttle's scanners lit up. 3 blips, moving fast, Exilor interceptors. Of course they weren't done. Of course they wanted to make sure he didn't live long enough to celebrate. The shuttle was armed, but lightly. 1 plasma turret, automated. No countermeasures. No hyperdrive. Just enough to fight for a minute before being shredded. Blake stared at the incoming signals. They weren't firing yet. They were closing in, maybe to capture, maybe to confirm. Didn't matter. He'd taken down a ship. He'd sent the data. He didn't owe them fear. He switched the turret to manual, bracing himself in the cockpit. The first interceptor veered close. Too confident, too fast. Blake fired. The plasma bolt caught it dead center, ripping through its shield and tearing the engine apart. It spun, flamed, and vanished into dust. The second peeled off, evasive. The third opened fire. The shuttle rocked. Sparks flew from the control panel. A burst of light blinded his left eye. The viewport cracked. The turret turned sluggishly. Blake fired again. Missed. Another hit. The hull screamed. He was going down. The second interceptor looped behind, ready for the kill shot. Blake stared at the console. One option left. He could reroute all power to the turret. One last shot. A charge so strong it might overheat the entire weapon and melt the armature. But if it hit... He punched the override. The turret whined, charged, glowed hot white. The second interceptor looped into view. Blake didn't hesitate. He fired. The blast ripped through space, slamming into the enemy ship with a force that shattered its shield like glass. It exploded, a burst of fire and light. The third interceptor veered off, panicked. Retreating? Blake didn't see, because the feedback from the turret fried half the shuttle's systems, including the life support. The cabin chilled instantly. Oxygen hissed out from a seam. Lights died. He slumped in his seat, staring at the stars as the cold crept in. His breath fogged. His eyelids grew heavy. He'd done what he came to do. One man, one answer, and an empire brought to its knees. As the darkness closed in, he smiled. Not from pride, from defiance, because they'd remember his name now. And Earth would rise. The cold was worse than the pain. It snuck in under his skin, not like a stab or a burn, but like something crawling, something slow and invisible. Blake Riker drifted, his body still inside the shattered dropship, his mind flickering like a dying signal. He didn't know how long it had been since the last shot, the last explosion, the last breath that didn't fog up the view screen. Seconds? Minutes? Maybe hours. The cockpit was cracked wide open now, exposed to space. Emergency seals had done their best to hold the pressure, but life support was gone. He felt it in his chest, each breath tighter than the last, like his lungs were protesting the cold, refusing to suck in one more gasp of recycled air. He reached for the controls, but his fingers were stiff. Numbers. Maybe this was it. Funny, he thought he'd be angry when it came. He thought he'd rage or scream or go out with some poetic last words. But all Blake felt was stillness. He'd done what needed to be done. And if this was death, then so be it. He let his head fall back, eyes drifting shut, stars fading into the edges of his mind like the last embers of a dying fire. Then, light. Not the light of stars or explosions. This was artificial, controlled, white-blue and harsh, a docking light, a tractor beam. The ship lurched. Blake's eyes snapped open. Voices filled his ear, static heavy, garbled at first, then suddenly clear as his comm implant, rebooted. Human vessel, unidentified human vessel, respond. This is Outrider 2. We've got visual on you. Hold tight. His heart stuttered. Outrider. That was Earth Command. He wasn't dead. He wasn't alone. He tried to speak, but his throat was frozen shut. A gurgle escaped. Then darkness took him again. Not from pain, but relief. When he woke, he was warm. That confused him more than anything. For a second, he thought maybe he'd hallucinated the rescue. Maybe the warmth was just his brain's final trick, some comforting lie before everything shut off. But then he heard the hum of familiar machinery, smelled sterilized air, felt the stiffness of medical bandages wrapped around his ribs. He opened his eyes. Earth steel above him, gray, scratched, military grade. And a face, rough, scarred, human, looking down at him. "Holy hell," the man said, grinning like he'd seen a ghost. "You're awake." Blake tried to sit up. "Easy," the man said, gently pushing him back down. "You've been out for 2 days. We pulled you from that wreck floating just past lunar orbit. Oxygen was at 5%. I don't know how the hell you made it." Blake licked dry lips. His voice came out broken. "Where?" "Earth orbit. The Outrider fleet. What's left of it, anyway. We've been running ops since the attack. Skirmishes mostly, keeping them from landing more troops. Blake's head spun. How long? Since I sent the node. About 72 hours. We got it, every byte. The Exilor schematics, the Purifier blueprints, command hierarchies, fleet routes, all of it. You saved us, Riker. Blake blinked slowly. He didn't feel like a hero. He felt like meat, used, bruised, barely stitched together. But hearing that the data made it real. Status? He croaked. Earth? The man's smile faded. It's bad. Global comms are fragmented. Most major cities are gone. We've retaken a few zones, but it's a war now, not just an invasion. Blake closed his eyes. They'd lost so much, but now they had something. Hope. He spent the next week in recovery. Every hour was a fight between his body's need to rest and his mind's refusal to stay still. He watched feeds, broken as they were, from ground forces and orbital skirmishes. Humans were dying by the thousands, but they were fighting harder than ever. And the data Blake had stolen? It changed everything. Within days of decrypting the core schematics, Earth's engineers identified weaknesses in the Exilor armor. Tactical teams began exploiting blind spots in their orbital platforms. A strike in Siberia managed to take out an entire Exilor supply node using makeshift EMPs and jury-rigged plasma shells. Blake watched it all from his bed, jaw clenched. He needed to be out there. He needed to fight. The medics argued. Command protested. But by the end of the second week, Blake was back on his feet, stitched and limping and barely whole, but alive and angry. Command brought him in for a debrief the moment he could stand without puking. The war room aboard Outrider Prime was cramped, buzzing with energy. Screens flickered with intel. Officers barked orders. And in the center of it all, standing like a worn-out statue, was General Halford. Riker, he said, nodding. General, you did something no one else has done. Blake said nothing. You hurt them. Bad. Still, Blake didn't speak. Halford stepped forward, lowering his voice. We intercepted a transmission 2 hours ago. The Exilor. They issued a declaration, not to Earth, to their own people. You know what it said? Blake shook his head. They named you. Not your rank. Not your unit. Your name. Blake Riker. They called you the tear in the chain. Said you were a threat to their stability. Blake met Halford's eyes. Good. The general chuckled. I figured you'd like that. What's the plan? Blake asked. Halford turned to the main screen. A new Exilor ship had entered Earth's orbit. Bigger than the others. Heavily armored. Command class. That ship is called the Veil. Intel says it's carrying their high strategist, one of the bastards who ordered the first strike. Blake's eyes narrowed. You want me on it? Halford nodded. You've already done the impossible. You've survived them. Outsmarted them. Hurt them in ways we didn't think possible. If anyone can breach the Veil, it's you. Blake didn't hesitate. When do I leave? Now. The mission was surgical, a stealth craft, small team. Get in, find the strategist, cut off the head. But Blake knew better than to expect a clean job. Nothing was clean anymore. Every fight was a brawl. Every breath was earned. He boarded the shuttle with a new suit, reinforced armor, adaptive camo, and a weapon designed using the very data he'd stolen. A hybrid rifle that could punch through Exilor plating like it was paper. His squad was tight. No names, no ranks, just specialists, all of them survivors, all of them ready to die. Blake didn't bother learning their names. He couldn't afford to. As the shuttle breached orbit, the Veil came into view. It was massive, twice the size of the ship he'd destroyed. It loomed above Earth like a blade waiting to fall. Blake stared at it through the viewport. You wanted war, he muttered. Let's finish what we started. They called it the Veil for a reason. Blake Riker had seen a lot of Exilor tech, faced it, bled because of it, but nothing felt like this. The ship didn't look like a war machine. It was art. A black monolith suspended in space, no edges, no seams, no windows. It absorbed light, swallowed it. The human eye couldn't settle on it for more than a few seconds without some instinct deep in the brain screaming, "This isn't natural." Blake's shuttle coasted through its outer scan zone under full stealth. No lights, no sound. Inside, the only thing louder than the silence was the heartbeat pounding in his own ears. The pilot whispered, "We're latched to an outer vent shaft. Breach in 2. Blake nodded to his team. 4 shadows in adaptive armor, faces hidden. They moved like ghosts, silent, practiced. This wasn't their first mission, but it might be their last. He didn't waste time with speeches, didn't tell them what to do. If they were here, they knew the stakes. This wasn't about survival. It was about ending something before it killed what was left of Earth. The breach hissed open. Cold air rushed past them. Blake moved first, crawling into the shaft, rifle slung tight to his back. The shaft was cramped, slick with moisture, pulsing faintly like a throat. Every inch of the veil felt alive, like it breathed through its own walls. He didn't like it. After 20 meters, the shaft opened into a service corridor. Dark. Empty. He dropped silently, crouching behind a bulkhead as the others followed. One by one, they fanned out. He tapped his HUD, bringing up the schematic, roughly pieced together from intercepted transmissions and what little intelligence Earth had managed to scrape from Exilor prisoners. The strategist was deep inside. Command deck, heavily shielded. He'd have to cut through 2 subcores, pass a weapons cache, and navigate a biosynthetic guard array. None of it mattered. This wasn't a job for diplomacy. This wasn't a strike. This was an execution. They moved fast, staying low, avoiding cameras and sensor threads. At every junction, Blake made the call. Go left, halt, drop one of the biomimic lures. Every step brought them closer to the strategist. But it wasn't long before they were noticed. It started with a tremor, then a high-pitched whine, like metal screaming. A blast door ahead slammed shut. Behind them, the wall opened. 3 Exilor burst from the shadows, their weapons humming with heat. One opened fire. The lead from Blake's team, a man they called Stone, went down hard. Half his helmet caved in, neck twisted. Blake didn't blink. He raised his rifle and fired 3 precise shots, one to the chest, one to the spine, one to the head. The Exilor dropped. His squad was already moving, the hallway turning into a storm of light and screaming metal. Grenades rolled. Plasma bolts scorched the walls. The air thickened with smoke and blood. Blake grabbed Stone's tags. Habit, maybe, or guilt. The others followed him through a vent chute, dropping into a lower level barely mapped on the schematic. This part of the ship was darker, older. The walls glistened with something that pulsed faintly blue, like veins. It wasn't just mechanical, it was alive. "Movement right flank," one of the team whispered. Blake swung left, catching a figure darting behind a column. Not Exilor, smaller. Human. Number. Not quite. It turned. Half its face was bone. The other half, metal. Its eye glowed. A hybrid. They'd started experimenting, splicing human prisoners into machines. Blake had heard the rumors. Now he saw them. The hybrid charged. Blake stepped forward and shot it in the leg. It dropped, screaming, not in pain, but rage. "Put it down," he said coldly. His teammate hesitated, just for a second, then did what needed doing. They moved on. By the time they reached the core shaft, only 3 remained. Blake, Wren, Cross. The rest were either dead or bleeding out in corridors that would soon melt under Exilor countermeasures. The shaft was vertical, 60 meters of climbing up through an open cylinder lined with light cables and energy coils. "We climb," Blake said. They didn't argue. Each meter burned. His muscles screamed. His ribs, never fully healed, pulled with every breath. But he climbed. Halfway up, an Exilor patrol spotted them. Blake didn't wait. He let go with one hand, swung his rifle, and fired upward. One Exilor fell. The others scattered. Wren lobbed a shock charge. Sparks rained down. They kept climbing. When they reached the top, the command deck door loomed. Blake didn't hesitate. He kicked it open. Inside was silence. And the strategist. Tall, pale, unarmored, it stood at the far end of a circular chamber surrounded by floating screens and humming glyphs. Its eyes were black voids, and it smiled as Blake entered. "You are the virus," it said in perfect English. "The flaw in our conquest." Blake stepped forward. "Number, I'm the cure to yours." The strategist laughed. "You think killing me will stop this?" "Number, I think killing you will make it hurt." The creature raised a hand. The floor shimmered. Dozens of hybrid units emerged, crawling from the walls, hissing. Wren fired first. The room exploded into chaos. Cross was ripped apart, dragged down under a swarm of claws. Blake and Wren fought back to back, shot after shot, blade after blade. Blake reached the strategist, breathing hard, soaked in sweat and blood. "You lose," he whispered. Then he raised his rifle and shot the creature point blank. Once, twice, 3 times. The strategist dropped, and everything went still. The hybrids froze. The ship groaned. A rupture echoed through the chamber. Self-destruct? Number something worse. A scream filled Blake's mind. Pure psychic agony. He dropped to his knees, clutching his head. The strategist twitched. Not dead, still alive. Wren shouted, "We need to go!" But Blake didn't move. He crawled forward, gritting through the pain, and pressed the barrel of his rifle against the strategist's skull. "No more speeches," he growled. Then he pulled the trigger. This time, it didn't move. The pain stopped. Silence returned. Wren pulled him up. "We've got 30 seconds to evac." They ran, through fire, through falling debris, through corridors breaking apart. They reached the shaft, jumped into a fallback chute, slid down into chaos. Their evac shuttle docked to a maintenance ring. Half damaged, engines barely humming, they jumped inside. Blake collapsed in the back, blood leaking from his side. Wren piloted. The shuttle peeled away. Behind them, the veil cracked open. Its core burst in a silent bloom of white-blue flame. It died screaming, and Earth watched it burn. They didn't cheer when the veil exploded. There were no parades, no speeches, no blaring trumpets, just silence. The kind of silence that settles after something ancient dies. The kind that leaves a ringing in your ears and a question in your chest. What now? Blake Riker sat on the edge of a temporary hospital cot aboard Outrider Prime, the shuttle bay still smeared with fuel streaks and soot. He hadn't said a word since the explosion. Not during evac. Not during the slow approach back to the fleet. Not even when the medics pulled Wren's shattered helmet off her head and whispered that she wouldn't make it through the night. The strategist was dead. The veil was gone. But so was half his team, and a part of himself. He could still feel the ghost of that scream, the psychic wail that tore through his skull as the strategist died. That wasn't just pain, that was memory, regret, hate so thick it curdled his blood. He knew what it meant. The war wasn't over. He was just the opening shot. An officer stepped into the room. Tall, young, trying to stand straighter than his nerves allowed. Commander Riker? Blake didn't correct him. He hadn't accepted a promotion. Didn't need a title. What? General Halford wants you in command. He said, it's urgent. Blake nodded once and stood, ignoring the soreness in his legs. The healing was slow. His ribs had been re-broken during the fight. His left hand had been partially scorched when Wren had shoved a shorted relay into his palm mid-firefight. Still, he moved like a man who didn't care about damage. Command was quiet when he arrived. No chatter. No blinking consoles. Just Halford, alone at the center table, staring at a frozen image of a planet Blake didn't recognize. Riker, he said without turning. General. Halford pointed to the screen. You know this place? Blake looked closer. The planet was small, dark green with strange rings around its equator. Number, where is it? System 48, Sector Edge, deep Exalor space. We never knew it existed. So why do we care now? Halford turned. His eyes were bloodshot. Not from sleep, from grief. Because when the veil exploded, our probes picked up a chain reaction. That planet lit up with signal activity, their kind of signal. Short range, encrypted, highly localized, and fast. In less than 12 hours, 30 Exalor ships launched from that world. Blake frowned. They're responding to the strategist's death. Exactly. Then we should intercept them. Halford sighed. We can't, not all of them. They split. Half are going deep into Exalor territory. The others? He tapped the console. A new image appeared. Earth. They're coming here. Blake didn't flinch. How long? 4 days, maybe 5. They're using high-gravity sublight skips. We'll see them before they fire. Not that it'll matter. Each of those ships is equipped with a planetary-scale plasma deployment system. Purifiers? Halford nodded grimly. Smaller versions, but still enough to vaporize entire cities. Blake looked away, jaw tightening. We have the data, the weaknesses, the flight patterns. Why can't we stop them? We're trying. Every fleet asset we have is in orbit, but we're outnumbered, outgunned, and worst of all, out of time. Blake turned slowly. So what do you want me to do? The general tapped the console again. Another image appeared. A facility. Underground, remote, Arctic zone. What is that? It's called Project Grey Hand. Something your mission made possible. Blake narrowed his eyes. You said there were no weapons left. Halford shook his head. Not Earth weapons. It took him a second to understand. You're using Exalor tech. We're copying it, adapting it. Your data didn't just give us schematics, it gave us something else, something no one saw until the decryption was complete. Blake stepped closer. What? They're control keys. That stopped him. They're what? Halford leaned in. The Exalor operate on a hive-linked command system. Every unit, every soldier, every drone, they all respond to signal commands from their strategists. It's not full mind control, but close. Orders given at a neural frequency, bioresonant pulses. Blake's mind raced. So if we had a way to fake that, we could command them, Halford finished. Or at the very least, disrupt their hierarchy. Create confusion, turn them on each other. Blake stared at the image of the facility. You tested this? Once, on a captured scout ship. The drone turned its weapons on its own handler. We shut it down before it could broadcast the event to the rest. And now, we're building a broadcast array. It needs to go live within 3 days. Once it does, we'll have a shot at turning this war. Blake didn't ask why he was being told all this. He knew. Something went wrong, he said quietly. Halford nodded. There was a breach, not Exalor, internal. Someone on the inside sabotaged the link core. The data's corrupted. The neural codes are scrambled. Blake folded his arms. So you need someone to go in, fix it, and hold off whatever's coming. Halford met his eyes. You're the only one who understands the Exilor structure well enough. The only one who's seen their command patterns in action, and more than that, you trust me to finish it. The general didn't answer. He didn't need to. Blake looked back at the screen. A dark world, an angry fleet, and a weapon that might be Earth's last hope. I'll leave in an hour, Blake said. No, Halford said firmly. You'll leave now. The flight to Grey Hand was silent. No escort, no broadcast. Even their route was off satellite, slipping under Exilor tracking nets to stay invisible. Blake sat alone in the shuttle's rear compartment, staring at the floor, rifle across his lap. He didn't fear death. He feared failure. Grey Hand sat beneath a glacier. No visible entrance. Only the biometric seal opened for the transport. The moment Blake stepped out, the cold punched him like a hammer. Worse than space. Worse than the Exilor ship. But cleaner. He was met by a team of engineers. No names, just tags, lead, signal, fire. They guided him inside. The core chamber pulsed with energy. At its center, a crystalline structure unlike anything human-made. The stolen Exilor tech shimmered with raw potential, cables feeding into it from all angles. It's unstable, Led explained. The sabotage wasn't physical. Someone tampered with the resonance protocols. Now the signal loops endlessly without transmitting. Blake nodded. Show me the neural map. They pulled it up. He stared for a long time, then smiled. It's not broken, he said softly. What? It's learning. The others looked confused. Blake stepped closer. They didn't destroy it. They triggered a learning mode. It's trying to understand who's speaking. Once it learns, it'll listen. Fire frowned. But it doesn't know we're human. No, Blake said. But it knows me. He stepped into the chamber. The air crackled. The crystal pulsed. And Blake spoke, not with words, with thought, with memory. He showed it the strategist, the hybrids, the war, the scream. He showed it pain and purpose. And then he whispered, "Obey." The crystal flared. Then, silence. A green light blinked. Signal acquired. Target locked. The array was online. They had one chance. And Blake would be the voice. The first time Blake Riker issued a command, the world held its breath. Inside the broadcast chamber of Project Grey Hand, the silence was absolute. Engineers stood frozen at their stations, eyes locked on the crystalline core that shimmered with otherworldly light. Cables hissed with static as the captured Exilor signal wound itself around Earth's systems, threading through relay satellites and deep space amplifiers. Blake stood at the center, strapped into a harness of neural threads that wrapped his skull like a crown of thorns. His body was anchored, but his mind floated somewhere between instinct and madness. He didn't speak with his mouth. He spoke through thought, through emotion, through rage. Across the void, on the edge of the solar system, Exilor ships broke from hyperspeed, their plasma cores flaring with silent fury. 30 vessels, each equipped with purifiers, each aimed at Earth. And Blake reached for them like a man stretching through the abyss. He didn't expect it to work. Not entirely, but it did. Not all the ships responded, not all obeyed, but 5 of them did. 5 massive warships stopped mid-burn and turned, slowly, deliberately, on their own. Inside Project Grey Hand, a screen burst into color. Live feed. Exilor vessels firing at each other. Internal chaos. Command fractures. Blake's breathing slowed. Sweat trickled down his spine. The system worked. It responded to him. Not just his thoughts, but his intent. The system didn't just listen. It believed. And that scared him more than anything. Fire, The technician standing closest to the neural readout stared at the monitor with wide, dry eyes. "He's in," she whispered. "He's inside them." Halford's voice came over the comm, rough and stunned. "Riker, can you push further?" Blake's voice rasped through gritted teeth. "I can try." He pushed harder. The 5 turned vessels began broadcasting pulses to the others. Some ignored it, but a few hesitated. Blake felt it. Not thought, not logic, but uncertainty. The hive link, whatever made the Exilor respond as one, it had gaps, places where fear leaked through. So Blake focused on that. Not on control, but on doubt. He showed them defeat. The death of the strategist. The fall of the veil. The sound of their own kind screaming in agony. He wove it into his signal, and 10 more ships faltered. Some fired blindly into the dark. One exploded without provocation. Earth's satellites watched it unfold. The Exilor fleet, once a perfectly aligned sword of fire, now broke apart like glass struck at its weakest point. But it wasn't enough. 15 ships still moved forward. 15 vessels still burned for Earth. Blake's vision blurred. Blood seeped from his nose. "Too many," he gasped. "They're resisting." Halford's voice returned, harder now. "Can you stop them?" "I don't know, Blake's breath caught. His heart thundered. The system pushed back. It was never meant for human minds. His thoughts flickered. For a moment he was back on the Veil, dragging Wren's broken body through fire. Then he was on Earth, watching his sister's voice cut out over a broken comm. And then, nothing. A void. A voice inside his skull, not his own. "You are not strategist. You are anomaly." Blake gritted his teeth. "Number, I'm the correction." The voice snarled. "You are virus." And then he screamed, not aloud. Inside the system, he showed it Earth burning, then Earth fighting back. He showed it the broken streets of Manhattan, where children dug through rubble for water. He showed it Chicago, leveled to ash. He showed it the smile of Mason just before the Exilor snapped his spine. He didn't reason. He roared, and the signal cracked. 3 more ships flipped, firing into their allies, but 12 still came. 12 death machines, 12 chances to fail. Halford's voice returned. "We've scrambled the fleet. We'll intercept. You did enough, Riker. Pull out." But Blake shook his head, whispering, "Not yet." Because he'd seen something, deep inside the signal, a command thread, a hidden fallback. The Exilor had a contingency. If the fleet was compromised, if the strategist was dead, a signal would pulse back to the homeworld. And that signal would say, Earth is more than prey. It's a threat. And then the full fleet would come. Not 30 ships, not 100, thousands. This was their version of total war. Blake couldn't let that signal go out. He reached for the thread, his mind tearing at the code like a man clawing open a locked door. His body convulsed. Fire screamed through his nerves. The technicians shouted, alarms blaring, the crystalline core pulsing so violently it threatened to explode. But Blake didn't stop. He followed the thread and buried it, wiped it, killed it. Inside his mind, the Exilor voice howled, traitor, defiler, unworthy. Blake smiled through the pain. Get used to it. And then the world went white. When he woke, he was in a medbay, his head wrapped, his body cold. Halford stood at the end of the bed. You stopped it, he said quietly. The signal, the fleet, all of it. Blake didn't speak. He couldn't. His throat was raw from screaming. His mind was shredded. But his eyes stayed fixed on Halford. And now? Blake whispered. The general nodded slowly. Now, we prepare. Because though the Exilor fleet had been broken, the war was only beginning. Blake Riker stood on the balcony of Earth Command's orbital ring, staring down at the planet he had nearly died to save. It looked smaller now. Not because he was in space, but because of what he'd seen, what he'd become. The neural damage was permanent. The technician said he should have died the moment he crushed the last Exalor signal. No human brain could withstand the full spectrum of an alien hive command array without liquefying from the inside out. But Blake had survived. Again. He moved slower now. Sometimes he forgot things. Names, places, pieces of who he was. But the fire was still there. The purpose hadn't dulled. If anything, it had only grown sharper. Below him, Earth was rebuilding. Not thriving, not celebrating, just rebuilding. Cities rising from ash. Families burying the lost. Soldiers limping through med stations with faraway eyes. Humanity had won a battle, but the war had only curled its claws tighter around their future. The Exalor hadn't returned. Not yet. Blake's interference had bought time. Months, maybe a year. The signal he'd buried had been a final warning. And the Exalor. They didn't forget. But something had changed. They were afraid now, not of Earth's weapons, not of its ships, but of its people, of what one man had done. A voice broke his thoughts. You know, most men in your condition would have taken the medal and disappeared by now. Blake turned slowly. General Halford stood there, older somehow than he'd looked even weeks ago. Shoulders lower, eyes rimmed with lines that hadn't been there before. Blake gave a half-smile. You think I care about medals? Halford grunted. Didn't think so. That's why I came. He handed Blake a small tablet. Classified clearance codes ran down the screen. A destination marked in red. What is it? Blake asked. Something we intercepted last week. Deep space relay out past the Jovian moons. Dead zone territory. It's not Exalor, at least not their usual tech. Blake scrolled. The file contained grainy footage, static warped visuals of a massive construct orbiting a dwarf star, angular, ancient. What am I looking at? Halford took a long breath. We think it's a seed, a construct left behind by whoever taught the Exalor how to build purifiers in the first place. Blake stiffened. They didn't invent them. Halford shook his head. They adapted them, like parasites, fast learners. But someone gave them the blueprint, maybe thousands of years ago. Blake stared at the footage. The structure pulsed faintly, still alive. Why show me this? He asked. Halford met his gaze. Because you're the only one who understands how deep this goes. If we don't strike first, someone else will. And if that construct is still active, Blake already knew. It'll start again. Halford nodded. You want me to lead another mission? No. Halford's voice lowered. I want you to decide if this war ends, or if it becomes something worse. Blake looked back at Earth. Wren's face flashed in his mind. Mason's last laugh. The voice of his sister lost on day one. He nodded. I'll go. The vessel was small. No escort, no broadcast. Just Blake, a single recon pilot named Keenan, and a ship fitted with stealth armor scavenged from Exalor wreckage. They called it Ash 1. It fit. As they neared the coordinates, Blake sat in the cockpit's rear seat, helmet off, suit powered down. The neural scars still burned when he got close to Exalor frequencies, but he could handle it. Pain didn't scare him anymore. What do you think it is? Keenan asked quietly, his hands steady on the controls. Blake didn't answer at first. Then, a question. Keenan glanced back. What kind of question? Blake stared out at the black. The kind with only one answer. The construct came into view like a ghost. It wasn't just massive, it was wrong. Every angle bent light in ways the human eye couldn't make sense of. It felt hostile, not in aggression, but in indifference, like it existed before things like mercy or thought. Keenan whistled. "Hell of a thing," Blake stood. "Drop me in." "Sir, this is a recon run. No insertion protocol. Command didn't authorize—" "I'm not asking." Keenan hesitated, then nodded. The drop pod was old, scarred from past missions. Blake climbed in, sealed the hatch, and breathed deep. He didn't feel fear, only certainty. As the pod ejected, gravity seized him. The stars spun. The construct loomed. He hit the outer hull with a heavy clang, magnetized boots locking on. The surface was cold. Dead. But beneath his feet, it thrummed. Alive, he moved across it, each step slower. The Exilor data fed into his HUD, highlighting symbols etched into the metal. None matched the known lexicon. This was older, simpler, primal. A hatch opened as he approached. It had been waiting. Inside, the corridors were silent. No life, no guards, no resistance, just invitation. Blake pressed on. Eventually, he reached the core, a chamber the size of a cathedral. At its center, a sphere floated, glowing faintly. Around it, shapes moved. Not machines, not flesh, something in between. And then, a voice, not like the Exilor, not angry, just curious. "You are the ripple." Blake swallowed hard. "Who are you?" "The origin, the fire that taught the Exilor how to burn." "Why?" "Because they asked." Blake took a step forward. "They came to you?" "Number they reached, hungered, desired power. We gave them a match. They lit the world." Blake felt his stomach twist. "How many?" "Many. Not just them. Others. Your kind is not first, not last." "You built the purifiers?" "We showed them the shape of destruction. What they did with it was beautiful." Blake's hands curled into fists. "They killed billions." "And learned. You did too." Blake stared at the floating sphere. "You sent the Exilor to us. They chose. You started this war. You are here to end it." He didn't respond. Because he realized something. This wasn't a weapon. This was a teacher, and the Exilor had been its students. Now it wanted a new one. You learned their code, broke their will. You are ready. Blake shook his head. "I'm not here to learn. Then you are here to destroy." He stared at the core. Thought of Earth. Thought of what would happen if this thing ever reached another race, another planet, another child crying under rubble. "Yes." The chamber dimmed. "Then choose the fire." Blake raised the pulse charge from his belt. Armed it. The sphere pulsed. "You will burn with me." He nodded. "I know," and pressed the trigger. Back on Ash 1, Keenan watched the construct flare, once, bright as a star, and then collapse into itself, silent and final. There were no words, no screams, just light, and then darkness. Blake Riker was gone. But Earth would never forget the man who answered war with fury and ended it with silence.